I am Majid Abai. I run a company called Conceptrise. We are, as you mentioned, advisors to technology companies in the areas of operations, technology, and revenue. Uh, the, the whole premise, as you mentioned, is about really how excited we get when we see a large amount of a state lottery, like what we had a couple of weeks ago that was $1 billion plus, and how we really think about what would we do if we won the lottery, what are the chances of us winning the lottery, we at least participate in by buying a ticket. And the question comes in, and I've made that parallel in life of how many of these lotteries really happen in our lives that we either participate or we have no chance of participating, it just happens to us, and how they impact our lives, and how can we really take control of that?
So before we get into that, because I think that was a thing you learned over time, I'd love you to take us back. You were telling me when we first talked that when you escaped post-revolutionary Iran, you were 18 and you walked across a desert. I'm sure there's a little more to that story. Why don't you tell the audience?
Well, I'll tell you about that in a second. If you allow me, let me take a step back and say that I believe that from a life lottery standpoint, there are different types of lotteries that we participate in. One of them is that we have no control over a lot of events that happens in our lives. For example, I was born in 1964 in Iran, and at that time, mortality rate in Iran was 170 per thousand births.
Wow.
So the chance of being born is good, but my mom in particular had 4 miscarriages herself before I came along. And therefore, me being born was by itself a chance. Being born in the family that I was born in by itself was a chance. I was born in a middle-class family who was very tight and very close, and also put a lot of emphasis on education, reading, and sports. And I could have been born in the same maternity ward to another woman a block away from my home, in another city, another town, another continent. So those are the areas that I think these are the lotteries that one wins or loses, but you have no control over it. So if I may now go circle back to the question you were asking. When I was born in Iran in 1964, fast forward 17 years, I graduated early from high school. And a lot of things have happened by then in Iran. In 1979, you have an Iranian revolution that took place. Later in 1979, you have the hostages situation between the US and Iran that happened. A war started in Iran between Iran and Iraq I believe it was in 1980. And Iranians stopped, really closed all universities under a guise of something called Cultural Revolution. So at 17-year-old, I have graduated and my options are limited into what I can do. In about a year, I have to go to war. In the meanwhile, I can work. But my goal had always been to really study and live in the United States, especially studying in the United States. And there was no chance of really what is it that I'm going to do in Iran from standpoint of studying. And I cannot get out of Iran legally because of the war and because of the situation as being potentially a soldier very soon. So that's where the parallel starts with buying a state lottery, is that I had to take a big chance. I had to really, the odds of me reaching to the United States was equivalent of really winning a lottery. So the first step was to really buy a ticket and making a plan with support of my family to really get out of Iran. And the only way to get out of Iran at that moment was to walk through a desert to Pakistan. And really, which took some time. And then from there, make my way west into the United States. And again, now the odds are even more astronomical for US to let me in legally into the United States, and the odds changed. And they would let me in to come into the United States legally, and that's where the story started.
So when you say buy a ticket, you meant metaphorically, you buy a ticket to, and then the family was supportive of you doing that, of course. It makes me think about these big life choices we make. And I think about risk management. Like one of the things we do as entrepreneurs is we're always doing risk management, right? That's maybe you could say that's maybe the most important job. It's a big part of it. And there's a bit of a risk just to even buying the ticket. Now, if I buy a ticket at the local store, my risk is $1, right? I'm only risking one of my dollars, but I know my chances of winning are, astronomical. But a person who spent $1 did win this last lottery. So talk to us just a little bit about how what our audience member could think about when you're faced with these situations, when you're doing that risk assessment, and we're not in a business as a person. What kind of tip or tool do you have for us?
It's a very, very good question, because all of us have dreams and goals and ideas and thoughts of things that we want to do. Maybe they're not as grand as we just discussed, but it could be a lot of different things. It could be buying a car, changing jobs, moving to a new city.
Sure.
And in a lot of cases, as you said, is the idea of the risk, is the idea of risk management, an idea of planning, an idea of executing. So everything that we just talked about from standpoint of business also applies to a person's goals and dreams. And as big or as small it would be, it's really the idea of what am I going to lose? What are my chances that I'm going to take? What are the ways that I can change the odds to my favor? And what are the backup plans if the original plan doesn't take place? And in a lot of cases, the original plan never takes place the way you think, as long as you have your eye on the goal and thinking that this is what I want to happen at the end.
I think people who are attracted to the TED platform and TED ideas tend to think big, right? It's like, because we know without a doubt that one talk can change people's lives. We've seen it a million times. Simon Sinek's talk, Sir Ken Robinson's talk. There's, Jill Bolte Taylor redefined all kinds of things for us. We know that's possible. How do you deal with, because there's a sense of the unknown. I think especially now, as we're post-COVID and people are changing into new jobs, or trying new things through some kind of life circumstance that they did not pick. How does one deal with that unknown in a way that helps them be more successful with the choice?
It's really important to really follow a methodology of making sure that your goal is always in sight. Making sure, number one, that you always never lose sight of your goal, whatever that is at that moment. Number two, to understand that failures happen, and you just have to get up and just continue towards the same goal, continue going. And third is really think ahead of what are the things that you could do to change the odds to become part of your favor, to your favor. And because of that, it really makes sense for really just being confident to go after this, because after the goal, because even if you don't make it, at least you know that you have tried. So from that standpoint, I think that those are the areas that I will take.
Us other TEDx organizers, we like to change the mission just a little bit from ideas worth sharing to ideas worth doing. And part of what we hope happens as people get inspired by a talk is to actually go and do a thing. So this talk may lead someone who's kind of been on the fence about a thing to go do it. And so let me see if I got your 3-part plan here. One was clear clear intention of the goal. A lot of people just, hey, well, let's just go. We'll hope it happens. So no, don't do that. A very clear goal. And I think you also said to always kind of see that, even if it's over the horizon, we know that that goal is there. And the second one, I think you talked about being resilient. So even if we're going to fail or something happens and whatever, that we have a little side trip, whatever, but think about our resilience. So that's things that we can do ourselves: good sleep, good health, good wellness, good nutrition, good social structure. So we're resilient. And then the last, and here's the one that I want to hear what your secret is. You said change the odds. Right. So how do I change the odds?
It's a really, really good question. If I may give you another part of my life story,
Please,
I think
please.
that could definitely help. In year 2000, I was diagnosed with a deadly disease.
Oh.
I had just been married less than 2 years, and as I remember it, and it was about this time of the year, and my wife and I sat in the doctor's office, and the doctor shows me a chart that says people with your disease, they have about 2 years to 4 years to live after diagnosis. So chances are good that you won't be around in about 4 years. After the initial shock wore off, I sat down, my wife and I sat down and we talked about it. And I realized that was extremely lucky. So it's a bad news, something I don't have any control over. And it seemed like a bad news, but I really took it as a good news. If I had not been diagnosed, I definitely would have died. There was no question about it. It was probably less than 2 years of life, but now I had the chance to do something about it. So I wanted to get control of that and change the odds to my favor. So I read about the disease. I read about various ways of fixing it. I really had some of the best doctors, I still do, to support me on this. I learned about nutrition. I learned about sports. I learned about mental health. I learned about, as you said, laughing. I learned about having people around me to help me. And really putting that all together helped me fight that disease really, really well. I had to go through surgery. I had to go through various treatments. I had to go through a lot of things. But here we sit exactly 20 years later, 22 years later, and I have beaten those odds. And I'm not on any kind of a medicine. The medicine is there, and actually part of our strategy was to delay the disease in such a way that medicine catches up with that disease. And now it has, but I don't even need the medicine at this moment. So it really changed the odds to my favor to be able to take control of that situation and really play all the areas that I could to take it to the next level that I needed to take it.
So taking an active role.
Correct. Being totally present. And I was lucky enough to help a few people along the way that had gotten the same disease. And I just happened to have learned about it, and really having the conversation with them helped them to be as resilient as I was going through the process.
And still, we want to make sure there's doctors involved and there's you doing all of those things. This is not healing yourself by reading a book. This is, it's like you're doing your part to be a really good patient and working under the doctor's care. I love that. What would you say if I asked if someone, because I'm going to guess, because you, as we said in the very beginning, you work with national companies and, big companies, they bring you in to, to help solve problems. I get the 3-point plan, but where in those 3 points, is there one of them that's more challenging than the others?
If we shift it from a person to an enterprise, yes, there are areas where it is very, very important to unify the whole team on that goal. Sure. So as long as we are able to bring in the whole executive team shareholders, all stakeholders to really think about the same goal, whatever that goal might be, whether it is growth, whether it is turnaround, whether it is more revenue. The biggest issue that I get is pushback by stakeholders of not having the same exact goals in mind. So when you sit down, originally it looks like as if they have the same goals. When you talk to them individually, it becomes completely a disparate situation.
Oh, you're just describing the human condition there, Majid, right? That's exactly what it is. So I'm curious, in your own life journey, when you talk about situations you can't control, like life is going to happen. I tend to think of that as the universe tapping me on the shoulder to try to get my attention, right? What would you say is one of the bigger surprises that's happened to you, and how did you deal with it?
Well, the biggest surprise that happened was the disease itself. So that was definitely one of the biggest surprises. I was in my mid-30s. By no means did I think it was, going to go that way. And I was not expecting it to go that way. But again, taps on the shoulder, big thanks to my wife. I couldn't have done this without my wife. And at the end of the day, the idea of us being able to work together to support each other to take it, it's exactly that. The tapping on the shoulder became just one of the events in life that we have to go through together.
I'm thinking of when you talk about leaving the family for a better life, or a hopeful better life. In your case, you've made that, you've had an active role in that. I kind of thinking about all of the people who are there's so many migrants right now, so many people that are immigrating away from really terrible situations. And it's all over the world. It's not any, as soon as I stopped in my mind, I started saying, oh, well, what about South America? But then we've got things happening in Southeast Asia, and then we have things happen. I mean, it's all over the world. It's not good for folks that are doing that. Majid, thank you so much for sharing that part of the story, because I think that will help people see, wow, look what can happen when you go against all the odds. Thanks so much.
You're quite welcome. Thank you for having me as part of the conversation.